Games and More.
And we're talking about, of course, comics,
games,
and
coffee. You know that gets cheesier each time.
I know. I think we'll just have to do a little thing or something, just do a recording and all that, too.
Well, we're going to have a third person next week. I wonder if a third person will make it less cheesy.
It could be, I'm not sure.
Or more.
So, actually, we're going to talk about topics as we talked about everything last week, and the last video cast, but we're going to talk about violence in games and comics and current standards and everything. And actually, Adam, why don't you kick us all off on that idea?
Okay. So, as a lot of you know, the violence in comics and games has dramatically increased from when we were kids. Now, I'm almost 30. I don't want to give your age away if you don't want it, but I'm almost 30. You know, I grew up with things like, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Same here.
Yeah, Darkwing Duck.
Batman, the animated series.
Batman. You cannot forget Batman, Spider-Man, all that kind of stuff.
Or even the X-Men 90s series.
Yeah, really. And it just makes me think, do you think we as a society with games and comics and basically in TV and everything in general and movies, do you think we've maybe go a little too far with our violence now? Because think of the stuff you'll see on regular TV. Look at The Walking Dead. Mm-hmm. I know we mentioned that last week too, but it's pretty good.
Especially even in the comic sense, it's very graphic in there too. And that series has been around for 10 years, so it is an example.
But do you think we pushed the envelope too far?
I think we have. I mean, we always can throw in the whole 9/11 talk about how post-world and everything else. I mean, we have a different sensibility compared to say 40 years ago. Like I said, I can not date my in-laws, but an example, when my own mom would talk about, when something was violent, cop shows as an example. Let's say T.J. But Adam, actually, take an example. Let's say T.J. Hooker, William Shatner and everything, which was a cop show, and it was actually a drama. I mean, guns were shot. There were things, same thing with Dragnet and everything. People were kicking it, but the violence was so to a minimum that people were expecting, like, ooh, wow, it's like a real life and everything. But you flash forward to, let's say, the early '90s, NYPD Blue, an example.
Very good example.
Great series, but exactly how they decided to push the envelope. I mean, swearing, nudity, and violence, an example. And it actually was kind of little. I mean, the reason it was such a success is because people saw it as real life. It's like, oh yeah, that's me in New York right now. I mean, I don't know. I know it's a TV show, but they weren't afraid to hide things. Even in the courtroom when L.A. Law first came up, and everything, there was more an example. And I think because people were feeling, oh, this is more true to life, I can accept it. And I think that's really where it's happened. I mean, same thing in the video games. I mean, let's face it, Legend of Zelda or Mario Bros. Used to be able to beat the bad guys or stomp them, they'd disappear in a puff of smoke. They still did that, but I mean, now you're kind of getting people, maimed, hurt, there is a bit of blood and everything. So, and why it's kind of, whoa, that wasn't shocking. Or that was not shocking or anything, but as an example of, people feel more prone to it. I think what was really horrible in society working into that is now we aren't fazed by it, and we think like kids, as we talk about kids with a Walking Dead lunchbox, or if you think back to the late 80s with a RoboCop lunchbox, and that movie itself is violent.
Well, actually, when you think of the violence in RoboCop, that's actually pretty PG-13 compared to what you get away with in today. I mean,
that's true, and especially with the remake of RoboCop coming out.
Well, I don't know. I'm not going to get into that.
I had to throw that in.
Some reboots can be good, but it makes me think. Think of when I was a kid. One of the things that was always big. You mentioned Batman the Animated Series earlier. The movies that were done by Tim Burton were considered extremely dark, and one of the first movies I remember my mom taking me to was actually Batman Returns.
Correct.
That was with Michael Keaton, Danny DeVito,
Michelle Pfeiffer, of course, Christopher Walken.
Yeah. So, and you think of it then, and you think of how dark that was then, and then you compare that's got a PG-13 rating attached to it, and that was 92, I believe.
Yeah, 92. They were 3 years apart at that point in the sequels.
And then you got things like The Dark Knight Rises, which we'll talk about other things with that later, but you got things like that, and it's just like, that would have been an extreme R rating when I was a kid. So
exactly.
And it just... you were talking about NYPD Blue. I've always been kind of against censorship. And I'm actually against censorship. I mean, I understand that, sometimes things are appropriate for children and sometimes things are not. But I always think of it, and you can jump in on this as a parent, it's up to the parents to really decide what their kids watch. It shouldn't be decided that I can't watch something because they've deemed it unfit for television. Just like NYPD Blue, like you were mentioning, they got away with a lot for its time, but you'll never hear like there you did every once in a while. Now you can a little bit, but you'll never hear. I'm going to keep it PG rated. You'll never hear the S word, and you'll never really hear the F word on television.
Correct.
But yet we get away with so much graphic violence from 7 o'clock until 10. That is like one giant blood fest on television.
Correct, and it is true. I mean, let's face it. And some kids do deem it as that is accessible. Like I said, vampires, zombies, thing. I mean, one show I do enjoy, but does have its moments, is like Chicago Fire, where they do go with that. I mean, they do worry about gang violence, and you're a firefighter. It's not, oh, I rescued the kitty and go home and run. It's like, no, it's a lot more, I can't say graphic, but it's definitely a little bit more like it's not butterflies and, rainbows would be the best way to put it, and everything. I understand that too, and censorship too. I mean, I do believe there's some, like there's stuff I don't want Tyler's name, just like with my nieces and nephews too and everything, but you can't.
Completely lost my train of thought there. So do you think that we maybe, as a society, have allowed more violence because that's what we deem to be real?
I think that is
because
the main
I really
reason.
don't look at things for violence. I'll be the first one to admit, sometimes violence in a video game is good. It gets me engaged, it gets me my adrenaline going, but I don't have to be. It doesn't have to be violent to be good either.
No, it doesn't.
No. Like, look at Tetris. That is the most non-violent game you will find, and that is the most addicting thing ever. Well, Angry Birds, but you can argue, they're hurting pigs.
But exactly. But there's also some other games that you can, download and do too, which are very addictive game. I would think Light Breeze is an example. I mean, that's such a puzzle thing. You just get into that game. The thing is, you're working on color code. I gotta get red and green. I have to get this to this. Area so it can do the light, and it's actually a learning game, but it can be just as addictive. And I think that's the thing. I mean, that's one thing we did. I mean, remember the first games that were out. You had Pong. Long before Space Invaders, you had these games that were interactive, were very addictive, and everything else. I mean, the original Donkey Kong. Let's face it, the worst violence was that if you got hit by a barrel or the fire hit you. But at the same time, it's like you were crushing barrels, jumping over them. I mean, to a point, it's like, well, that's no different than if I'm going to clean out the garage and I'm going to throw something out in the dumpster. And then Donkey Kong would fall off everything. Now that would be considered violent, but everybody's like, oh, it's like King Kong, he fell off the building, And I think that's what's intimate. But yeah, I mean, in a way it is. I think it's such a broad topic. We could be here for hours on end, and we can go into tons of different things, both good and bad, of left and stuff, our own experiences. But I think what it comes down to, and this I just speak in general, is just like, what do you consider appropriate? What is appropriate? Because the truth is, you find that too violent or you find that too crazy, you don't have to watch it, you don't have to buy it, you don't have to tell people to do it. You can just leave it alone. I mean, you really can't. Now, it doesn't mean that if you see somebody doing it and it causes, then, interaction. But I think it's more of your point of view. What is good for you? And if it isn't much, then be fine.
So then, you as a parent, where do you draw the line for violence? Do you draw it at... Oh, man, he's going to... Okay. Where do you draw the line as a parent for violence? Do you draw it at like, okay, well, Mario and the Lego series is okay, but God of War, well, obviously, Tyler's 2? Yeah. So obviously not God of War, but I mean, where do you really draw the line with something like that? Where do you, as a parent, say, okay, well, this is too violent, even though it's got an E10 rating or a T rating? Where do you personally...
Well, and that's interesting considering the age. And like I said, I have 2 teenage nephews. I have 2
So with them too, where do you think?
Well, and that's the thing, because I'm not, I'm the uncle. I'm the fun uncle. I'm not the parent. I mean, that's up to the parents. But my son, one of his games he loves playing on my iPad is Fruit Ninja. And why, we know that's slicing fruit and everything else too. I mean, let's face it, the fruit juice splatters, you have bombs that explode. I think that works good because in a way it's kind of telling you, it's because the game is more about coordination, and let's face it, just like Tetris, Fruit Ninja can get very addictive very fast. I mean, I myself played it, and next thing you know, it's an hour later, and it's like, whoa, I've been playing this game for an hour. But I think
it's a modern Tetris.
It is, just like Angry Birds. And but I think the best way is that's a good folks. Now, but as I was saying, I added that too. As I think right there, that's it, because it's an because he gets very excited, gets very energetic and everything. The only thing he's doing is cutting fruit in half and trying to get going. And if the bomb explodes, it's just, it explodes, but it's just a little boom white light, not like, oh no. I mean, that's thing. But I mean, in the way too, you can make an argument is like, well, is that too violent? Because you have you're slicing fruits. Where is that? I think right now for me, like as a parent, I have to determine what is acceptable, what is not. But I have to also think about what was me when I was, little playing those. What was it when I was playing Gradius, classic space game? What are we gonna do with that? So we get the sound, it's people.
Edit button.
Exactly. But, that's my argument on that for now. So I think for now, I'm going to leave it as that.
Okay. And do you think that more realistic violence more non-realistic violence should be implemented into games as opposed to realistic? Because, I mean, if you think of the games that are huge right now, Call of Duty, I'm not a huge fan of it. I haven't been coy with that. But think about it. There's actually war veterans that cannot play that game because it gives them nightmares and tremors and all kinds of messed up problems. You look at a game like Heavy Rain is a very good example of extreme violence, and that was even violence towards kids.
Right.
I mean, it was aimed at adults.
And I think it's interesting. I mean, it is a good question. I mean, let's face it. I mean, but one thing is when
there's a difference in those violence.
They're really. I mean, you have raised a very interesting point where even the kids playing like that's just silly and everything. But I think I can actually throw a wonderful comic reference. One of the biggest issue that happened years ago, which was both something that was by Fantastic Four. Everybody knows Fantastic Four, but there was an example.
No, please explain.
No. I will explain it in 2 seconds.
How many of them are there again? And they're not wonderful, they're fantastic.
No, they're 4. And they're fantastic, correct. But, example, Fantastic Four. Back in the, because there was a 60s animation, in the 70s they did the animated series, but they replaced the Human Torch with, Herbie the Robot. And make your own joke up here, folks. But, the one reason they did is they were afraid people were going to light themselves on fire. Kids were going to do it pretending to be the Human Torch. Because let's face it, there are people who see superheroes or fantasy characters and do try to go with that. I mean, it can go as far as like Lord of the Rings, where people themselves talking about magic and everything, like they're doing very crazy stuff, and like you realize it's real. And I think that's a good point. But it turned into a very classic story in Fantastic Four back in the '80s, and that was an example of. Whoa, hold on a second. I mean, and the truth is, can we do it? But keep in mind, some kids who are imaginative can think of stuff like that. And everything. And like I said, this is such a double-edged sword when we talk about realistic versus unrealistic.
Which we'll probably talk about next week, too. And several times.
Yeah, but I think that's an example of that right there. But, does it? It could be, it couldn't be. I mean, let's say Zelda in here. I mean, we got, giant cactuses that come to life that you're attacking and trying to save the princess and blah, blah, blah. Clean up the garden. He ends up pretending to be Link, taking out the lead tanks, killing dandelions, something that we do every day. They're weeds, We don't think about them. It's like, oh, isn't that cute? But at the same time, like, wait a second. So like I said, I think it's just too much. I'm not going to give some point of view that's going to be the argument that's going to work. I'm not going to do one. Some people will agree with me. Some people won't agree with me. I think it really depends on the people. But, in a way, it just depends on how you're raised and what you're meant to believe and what you feel is appropriate in that case. The world of the internet and say, oh, I never knew that. Or you can see these behind-the-scenes things. And they'll even talk about, let's face it, because I mean, if you look at the first 5 episodes of Sesame Street in 1969, I mean, they even say this is not quite appropriate for kids this age, because you had complete strangers inviting kids into their houses. You had, you talked about,
back then it was fine.
Exactly. You had perspective and so forth and everything. I mean, there was also terms and stuff. I mean, let's face it, Cookie Monster was a glutton. Now it's like, well, okay, obesity's high. They have him. Eating more healthy foods, and that's turned into its own in-joke. Same thing with Oscar over, he was just mean on things compared to now, like, well, he's still mean, but they tone it down because of the times and everything. I mean, I think, and that's what's so interesting about Sesame Street, especially a series that's been around for over 40 years, and some of the original actors are still, luckily with us.
Rest in peace, Mr. Hooper.
Yep.
Moment of silence.
Yeah, moment of silence for Mr. Hooper. But I think it is, because what they did in Sesame Street is when they realized that the kids reacted better when people and the Muppets were interacting. And then sometimes it was just the people or just the Muppets. It worked too, but they liked it more for that. And even, excuse me.
winter weather here in Illinois.
Exactly. Cold season. Please, spring, come with us. Anyhow, but as I was saying, I mean, let's face it. I mean, especially I see these scenes for the DVDs for Tyler. I see more of the Muppets versus the people and everything. You know, pick or choose who you love or most and everything else. I think those now in this time, while they still like the human Muppet interaction, now they just aren't afraid just to do Muppets, but they don't want to do it 100% of the time. I mean, one controversy. If you look at the late 90s, people talk about the popularity of Elmo and how Elmo kind of took over compared to now, the way it is. But the one thing they were finding out is the last 15 minutes of Sesame Street is kids were turning out. They were getting bored, and you know, they've had their 15 minutes, that was enough. And they put Elmo's World together because it caught their attention. But it's like anything else, after a couple of years that went out, and kids wanted to say, oh, enough of this, I don't want to see Elmo at the end of every 15 minutes. And then it started going the opposite, where, oh, Elmo's coming on, click the channel. So, you know, people go in spurts. Attention span's different, people are different, so forth and so forth and so forth.
That's almost like why it seems like everything that was old once is now new.
Right, or new is old.
Because look at all these things that are getting rebooted.
Yeah.
Transformers is a good, you know, they're, nobody's there.
Quiet and nobody comes in that walking area. We'll find it eventually, folks. Back on topic. I
don't know, there's kids section over there, but there's no kids right now, so I don't know.
Yeah, we'll go for it some other time.
Yeah. But anyway, like Transformers. We'll just end it right there. Transformers is a good example of that. Look at what else they're rebooting. They're rebooting Ninja Turtles, which everyone has been having their say on that.
Right. I mean, the new Star Wars series coming up in a couple years. I mean, Star Trek, which has been wonderful and everything, but how that caused it. And let's face it, I mean, we're doing something. I mean, they just relaunched the Spider-Man films last year, even though we got another one coming out next year and everything. They say, well, maybe it was a little earlier than that. Or the X-Men series, where now we're kind of rebooted that to the past, but...
Well, I hear the new one, Days of Future Past, is not going to be a reboot.
No, it's more of a continuation.
Yeah.
And the truth is, the remake wasn't a reboot; it was a prequel. Let's face it. So it worked, where you could still keep the stories and maintain the main three films. But I think that's an example. I mean,
I need them to bring back Cyclops and Professor X, because you cannot kill off two of the most loved characters and keep them killed.
Exactly.
Unless you're just ending the whole franchise, which they're not going to.
Right. Exactly. But I think it's just like in comics or video games where they reboot. Is it too soon for a reboot? I mean, let's face it. They rebooted Nova after it was a successful series. That's caused huge controversy, even though. I, as a reader too, have actually enjoyed the newer Nova, but it's like, I still want Rich. And now that creative team's already moving on here in 2 months. It's like, well, what was the point of the State of Guardians of the Galaxy? We're going to reboot it, even though it was a successful series, and the movie's coming out in 2014. But now it's like, well, yeah, now we're changing artists, and we're going to kind of say the fact that we're already know who these characters are, but there might be fans. I'm like, you've already kind of established who these are. Let's move on with the storyline. Okay, you don't need some people, unless it's a complete change. You don't need to reintroduce.
Well, I don't know, like the Grand Theft Auto series, which gets a lot of flack for being overly violent.
Right.
But I don't remember them ever. I've seen them have crossover characters before, where they'll kind of put him in the corner or something like that. But every game, or almost every game, has had a completely different cast.
Right.
But none of those are considered reboots. So do you think maybe once they get a cast, they should just stick with it? Or do you think it's okay to do like what Rockstar has done, which was they gave you a game, they said, guess what, that's an in-game story. Now we're going to move over here. We're going to call it Grand Theft Auto 2, but we're giving you a whole new story. And then, of course, they have their little spin-outs where it's Grand Theft Auto 4, which became The Lost and Damned, and then also became Ballad Gay Tony, where they grabbed little lesser-known characters and gave them their own story. So do you think that would be...
And it can go either way. I mean, especially in franchise. I mean, when they're in the animated or comic or even, a comic series or game series, you can get away because the characters are fictional. They're digital. They're paper print. So, it can work because they can do it to the audience compared to, like, say, a TV show or a movie where you completely change it. The base story is there, and it's kind of like, well, it's kind of fresh in mind. It isn't like, oh, we did this movie 40 years ago, and now we're going to redo it again. It's like, well, the people 40 years ago might remember, but this is a whole new generation, whole new audience. It's going to work.
It doesn't work all the time. You see Charlie's Angels, like that was a huge TV series, and then the movie did okay.
Right.
And then they
or
did
the Knight Rider series a few years ago. Exactly. Which was technically a sequel, even though it was a remake. I
think the only one that's really done well has been the new Hawaii 5-0.
Right.
And that's And then everybody clammed onto that, and it's like, okay, well, that's not going to work for every series.
Right, exactly. Sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. Exactly. It's just like you can't do a spin-off of the same concept. How many CSIs did we have to get?
We got 3, and they just got rid of Miami, which was the best one, I thought, because I liked David Caruso putting on his glasses, but that was iconic, but that was the
that's
only
an
one.
example. You only can spin off so many things so much. I mean, even when they were doing the Star Trek series, it was a different cast. It was still in the same timeline or universe, but it worked. You had time to, work the old audience into the new audience.
Mhm.
I even joked about like Voyager and Deep Space Nine, even though they were 3 years apart from the series starting. Voyager ended up getting better ratings than Deep Space Nine, which was not what they were intending to do.
No, that was not.
Did both series stand on their own? Would they both be loved? Are they still remembered classic and on Blu-ray? Sure. But I think that's an example where they were able to keep that audience and slowly migrate, just like Next Generation and Deep Space Nine.
That's partially why we have the big debate about who's better, Kirk or Picard.
Right, exactly.
It's like, wait, 2 different generations. And
Right, exactly. And just like right now, they talk about like Chris Pine versus William Shatner as Kirk now in the current series and everything, or Zachary Quinto versus Leonard Nimoy. Technically they're both there.
I heard
Time travel and alternate realities.
That was actually fun.
Yeah, I have to agree.
I heard a rumor, and this is just rumors right now. I don't think it's been confirmed or denied. I haven't looked, but I heard that William Shatner might make at least a cameo in the new Star Trek.
Exactly.
Which I was honestly kind of surprised I didn't see him in the first one.
Right, but at the same time, it was also over conflicts and so forth. I mean, it worked out with Leonard Nimoy, and I think that worked perfect because Spock bridged the gap between both the classic series and the new rebooted series and everything too. But like I said, we'll save the Star Trek talk, especially with the movie coming out in a couple movies. Same thing with the Iron Man film. I mean, I think right now as we talk about that, we'll probably get more into the movie based on that genre of the games and stuff. Probably as we get into more summertime and everything else. So, but I think make the long and short of it, because I don't want us to get too in, otherwise we sound like we're ranting. We got a lot of editing to do.
Yeah.
Is I'll just say this.
You'll see that.
Sometimes, yes. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And depending on the audience and depending on the culture and the genre, is just what's going to happen. So I think with games, videos, even comics and everything, I mean, let's face it, DC 52, as I talked about in the previous episode, on the relaunch of that basically. So we're going to start all over, make all the characters younger, redo everything, redo their histories, and except for the classic origins, modernize them. Same thing with Marvel and everything kind of right now. But I think that's an example. Those are the basic. It's good. Because here's the easiest way to say it. You can't please everybody 100% of the time. No matter what, someone's going to complain it's the best thing since sliced bread. And let's face it, people who said sliced bread probably complain like, hey, I like my loaves of bread. I am not making this whatever you call sandwich or toast. Okay, I like my loaf of bread. Live with it.
So this might be for... So this might be for another topic, though. But do you think, because bringing it back to what this all was about violence in the mediums, do you think that violence on television and movies, and especially games and comics, do you think that can be blamed on real world violence? See, and here's my thing on that: if the Grand Theft Auto sold like 40 bajillion copies.
Right.
No, like 40 million copies were sold, and that's just the new copies. That's not saying what was sold used from
or
GameStop.
Or $500,000 in Angry Birds per day.
But see, if there's 40 million copies sold, and let's say, okay, yeah, the game inspired this 20x of violence around the world. That's actually a pretty good... I mean, look at that. That's, okay, 40 million copies of this thing sold, and only these small group did anything bad as a result of it.
Right.
So I personally don't think you can blame real-world violence on games. Not that if the wrong person gets a hold of it, it can't be harmful, but that's also what we have ratings for, and that's what we have parenting for.
Right, exactly. And I think that's the best way to say it. But the truth is, I mean, let's face it, and like I said, I'm not getting into any debate and everything else. I mean, especially in the last few months with all the absolutely horrible violence that's been happening in the country and the world in general. I mean, it is, but as
the game's never killed anybody.
Exactly.
Wars have killed somebody, but a war never started because, hey, guess what? Call of Duty, we're going to go do it too.
Right. I think, and unfortunately, people have problems. People have. I mean, you pray for them that doesn't happen. I mean, that's just the easiest way to say it. But as they say, I mean, the truth is, you do do your best, and sometimes you just try even more to be your best and just do it as best you can.
Mhm.
And the truth is, you can't control it because we all have freedom of choice. But that doesn't mean I succeed or anything. I condone it horribly. I mean, not a pacifist, but I believe hugely there's always a way to overcome violence.
Mm.
There just is. And you always can blame someone or something, somebody not seeing something when they could have, or saying, oh, that made that person more agitated, or that person didn't do this, or that person didn't do that. And the truth is, you're always going to have a blame game.
You are. Well, see, here's the thing: is like when I was a kid, and I won't go too much into my own personal story, but when I was a kid, I've got problems with my eye up here. I was made fun of mercilessly for it. Kids can be mean.
And bullying's huge these days.
I was made fun of for it, and I actually became really violent, and not violent, but very aggressive, very depressed. And one thing that my mom always did was she let us play Mario Brothers, the original Mario Brothers. And she would let me play things on, like, the original Mortal Kombats and things like that. So eventually what I would do is I would actually come home, and remember, I'm just a kid at this point.
Right.
I would actually come home really upset, frustrated that some of the people made fun of me or said bad things about me. I would actually put on Mortal Kombat, and I would get my aggression out that way. And I learned that at a very young age, that channel the aggression to there, and I don't get in trouble in real life.
Right. Well, another thing too is my older too. I mean, sometimes you want to just blow off steam, but sometimes is you can take stress and anger, like you can channel it to something positive. I mean, some people they go for runs. Some people they go for a bike ride. Some people, in my case, for years it was read a comic. Just do that little world escape. And yes, and everything else. I mean, now it's like I write a blog. I work on homework. I work a little ahead just to make my coworkers happier and everything else. And I think that's the stuff. I do this. It's a nice little something to channel that.
I do Vice Alice. So.
Exactly. And I don't come in here being violent. I'm not ranting on some private kind of vlog or anything. This is just normal general discussion you can have anywhere else. And we don't want to go. We're not preaching, but we don't want to go controversial either. But I think it is everybody has. There's plenty of outlets that can help you against violence. Like you said, that sometimes aggression too. I can remember playing, years ago, I was playing a game, Ultra Beast and everything, and I think I just had a bad day that day. It was summertime too. I mean, wonderful warm day. I just was having a bad day. I played Ultra Beast at Walmart for 10 minutes because it was a huge checkout line, put in 2 quarters, played it. I felt better afterwards. Went home, relaxed, watched some TV, ate a sandwich, and I think I even drew a picture that day. I can't remember vaguely. I was 10, okay? But I mean, that's an example and all that. I think you can't blame all of you. There's always going to be something is always going to get missed. There is sometimes there's always a center of that could have stopped anything. Let's face it, there are plenty. History has shown us that there's ways that things could have been avoided just if this person would have spoke here or this person would turn left instead of right. So I think you can always blame something, but you always have to look at it to who really is at fault in the long run, but at the same time don't always look for a scapegoat. There's always going to be an error stuff. I just say
sometimes bad things just happen.
Bad things just unfortunately happen.
See,
and hopefully someday understand why.
Well, see, I'm afraid to admit, I know you're a Christian guy. I'm a Christian too, but I've always believed that there's balance in the world too. I've always thought, we remember the school shooting that happened last December.
Right.
Remember how horrible we felt about that?
Oh yeah, because I mean, we were watching it too, and I mean, we were just all shocked by it.
But at the same time, it's like, I'm really not trying to upset anybody, but it's like, could something have upset us that much if something else hadn't made us as equally as happy?
And the truth is, and that's a good question.
It's like I've just always been one for balance,
Right.
Can I be sad? Can I enjoy this sunny day if I've never experienced a rainy day?
Right.
Can I enjoy being dry if I've never been wet?
Exactly. And that's a good point. Not that I, think, and I think that was absolutely horrible.
Yeah, it should never happen again.
No, I agree, but completely. And I pray every night, that never happens to me or my own kid or any of my relatives or cousins or nieces or nephews.
Yeah, I knew nobody that got hurt in there, but I still felt affected by it.
And the truth is, I mean, the sad thing, I mean, as much as we all can say is, there was an old saying years ago, the world would be at peace if children ran the world. But at the same time,
we'd all be eating chocolate for dinner.
Exactly. And I think, and we're, I mean,
and I do sometimes.
And like I said, we're running pretty low despite edits here. Yes, folks, wait till if you ever see the bloopers later on, you'll see what we do. But I think the easiest way to say is we just got to, someday we are going to understand why things happen. Because let's face it, bad things do happen. We always will question, why do bad things happen? You know, why did I get that extra bill? Why did I just, why did I have to go into bankruptcy, stuff like that. I mean, there's tons of stuff, and someday I hope we do understand. But I think I always put the reason that everything happens for a reason. Not that I thought that happened for a reason. I thought that was the most horrible thing ever, and all that.
And we'll probably talk a little bit more about it next week, a little more in depth, but we're not going to go massively.
Exactly. But I just say, those families always just, I pray for them, hope that, thing that never ever happens again. But like I said, unfortunately, there are things in the world we just can't control, and we just cannot control, and we got to believe the best of everything. That there's a reason and so forth. And
people try to turn that into a gun issue or a gaming violence. I just more say it's a mental health.
There's more stuff we got to worry about and pray about right now that's going on in the world. It's crazy, but we're not going to bring any of these topics. Because like I said, we're neutral here, and we try to keep people happy.
We try to keep peaceful.
We try to be happy. We're just talking about stuff we love and stuff that anybody else can talk about on the world or post an email. But I'm just saying. So I'm just gonna. The easiest way to say is, I just hope
it never happens again.
Exactly. That's the best way is, and pray for it, and the families, and that's the best way to do that. So, and I think that's the best way to say it on that topic today.
Yeah, we should probably just end it on that. That was actually the best way to say it.
I think so too. So, all right. So we will show you, if not next week, definitely soon, guys, for games, comics, and
coffee.
Mine's coffee.